Welcome to MoveMyBiz.com's webinar series, Ask the Experts, where various office relocation industry leaders share their insights, stories, and experiences. In this edition, we have Matt Watson of Apex Facility Resources. Matt is the owner and VP of Development at Apex Facility Resources, and he has 20 years of industry experience.
All right.
Okay. Without any further ado, it's Matt Watson from Apex Facility Resources out of Seattle.
Welcome, everybody. Larry and I were just talking, and Larry asked me, gee, Matt, how long you've been, or how many moves do you think you've done in your career? And we did some quick calculations, and the numbers came into a little over 6,000 company moves over roughly 30 years in the business, and we're closing in on 200,000 individuals within those companies. And he said, you know, man, you must know it all. And I said, you know what? I'm learning something new every day. So this whole conversation is about some of the learnings that we have here in Seattle. We work in a very competitive environment with clients, and our clients are working in a very hyper-competitive world today. So the first steps, and I'll just go through some of the key steps. We're going to cover some of the key steps that we think make a good start and or a good finish on an office move and or planning a workspace transition. Not always are people are moving. Oftentimes people are trying to reconfigure their space to work better for them. So number one, we're starting with workspace strategy. What do we mean by workspace? First of all, workspace is the same as your office, but what's interesting now is people are working everywhere, so the workspace has evolved, and clients and customers and all verticals are seeing the workspace as strategically differently than they've seen it in the past. And a lot of that is a result of their employees, both who they have now and who they're trying to attract and retain. So the strategic approach to defining a workspace and to define that early in the process is critical, because there's a ripple effect that comes out of an ill-defined or non-defined workspace strategy. And that's not just about what furniture you're going to use, what furniture you're going to buy. It's a combination of furnishing, technology, how you're going to employ and integrate technology into your workspace, also workspace policy and training for your employees. So having a well-rounded strategy is critical. I think that what we really see, and there's about 3 little points I'm going to make, is when I say identify company work style, that comes out of work modes, and the work modes are, you know, typically focus, heads down focus, collaboration, learning, and social. And we're seeing a shift in today's environment, shifting from the focus of the past, the focused work of the past, which required offices and walls and high panel walls, to more of a open and collaborative environment. And in many cases, we're seeing this overemphasized, and we're finding that workspace policy and training aren't keeping up, nor is technology. So there is some problems out there with the overuse of open space. But ultimately, what is important is to consider the preferences and work styles of your people, and then assess what that's going to mean in terms of design and layout of the space. Ultimately, what we see the tough equation being is how to design a space that's relevant for the current employees that you have today, and also for those you're trying to attract and retain tomorrow. And there are diverse and completely opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of workspace preferences between what I would call or what people call the generations in the workplace, the boomers, the Xers, and the Ys, and now the connected who are following the Ys into our workforce. They're completely different preferences. And so that's going to drive the design of space, and again, the strategic approach to creating a new space that's going to attract and retain and make your company more competitive is vital to the process. And then ultimately, it has to be flexible and nimble to change. We find that the spaces we come across both on our services side and our commercial interior side, clients we are working with often are faced with, just a couple years into their lease, somewhat of a loss of productivity or design relevance, or what we call obsolescence. And what we work hard with our clients to do is to figure out flexible designs that keep them or allow them to shift and change their workspace environments to meet the preferences of teams and employees that they're trying to attract and retain. So ultimately, that business has to be positioned that way. So this is kind of the first step. And what happens out of this step is an analysis and understanding, whether that's done with an architect, a designer, whether that's done with a good furniture, commercial furniture and interiors company, or a consultant. That's a first key step, because once you know your workspace design, you can then start creating the important parts of the scope. And I think what we run into when we go out and meet with clients is we see a real strong lack of understanding of what the client wants or needs. And I can tell you, I've been on so many walkthroughs. It's very frustrating as a commercial relocation provider to go into even the largest of companies, and the customer still has not defined the scope of what's moving. They don't know what level of services they need for packing or technology, and so they're really lost. And we literally, as a group, sometimes help a client define the scope of their project. Probably a huge waste of time, not only for the vendors that are in that meeting or the consultants, but also the customer. So really, to define that scope is a strong process. And the first step is to really understand the schedule. So once you have signed your lease and you've got a construction timeline and you've talked to your furniture vendor, typically you'll have product lead times. First thing to do is to check that work schedule against your productivity and workflow internally in your organization. We find a lot of customers. Yep.
So Matt, let me interrupt a second. So when you're talking about defining the scope and the schedules, in your experience, especially like for the fit out, getting, I assume most of the time the building owner takes care of the fit out. How often is that done on time, or is it down to the wire? Give us an idea of where that usually falls into place.
Yeah, the construction delays are always a challenge and part of the equation, but I think what I find most of the time is people truly don't, since they don't understand the construction process, they don't go through it every day. So to develop the idea or to get early on from, and we'll talk a little bit in the next slide or so here, we're going to talk about how to develop the team, but ultimately what happens is when people don't understand what the construction schedule looks like, they don't know what the timelines and their deliverables are. Traditionally, a building owner will build everything out to the voice and data cabling. The communication infrastructure on out is the tenant's responsibility. So, and the timing between voice and data cable infrastructure and the build out of workstations has to work within the timing of the construction, because there's a permit process and sign-off for electrical and low voltage data, which is with the data lines. So oftentimes it's a choreography that doesn't get correctly assessed from the beginning because people don't understand the timelines and the decision-making that's needed to go into that process.
And I think that's one of the things that I think, just from doing the interviews with folks who have relocated and talking to some architects and so forth, it's a healthy percentage of the time that the fit out is, takes more time than initially planned, and often is over budget. Is that kind of what you see, or what are the things we do to prevent that?
Yeah, I think that the budget is a huge part of it, because the client early on, if they haven't defined a workspace strategy and they've gone out and signed a lease, oftentimes they're trying to fit a square peg in the round hole because they don't know, they're really not going into a space that works for them. And we find ourselves in that, we don't get on board early enough with the client. So what happens is we're really working just to try to make them fit. And that's where those fit out problems really kind of occur, is when we don't start early enough in the process, even before we talk to our realtor, we should know what our workspace strategy and work style requirements are going into that. That would avoid a lot of this. And then after that, you're not trying to play catch up and repair what's already kind of broken going into the actual space. Before you even move in, clients have real great challenges. And then ultimately, you know, from the moving perspective, understanding the scope, the physical inventory that needs to be moved, the technology and IT requirements are a huge part of that, and having that as a part of this is really important. And then what additional services, you know, again, voice and data cabling, furniture installation, packing and prep, PC disconnect and server disconnect, reconnect are all parts and choices to scope, and understanding what your internal capabilities are versus what you want to have a vendor or a third party help you with is key to the game.
You have just watched part 1 of 3 of MoveMyBiz.com's Ask the Expert webinar series with Matt Watson of Apex Facility Resources. Go to MoveMyBiz.com for more webinars, videos, articles, checklists, timelines, and everything else for your office relocation.